Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master. And in the past, in previous episodes of this podcast, I have talked about how this isn't just the chronicles of the fictional characters that we play, this also has inadvertently become kind of a record of the lives of the players who've played the game. And sometimes I've talked about how one of our players passed away. Other times I talked about some of our players got married or they had kids, or I even talked about us graduating high school, things like that. So it's about our lives, for better or worse, and there's ups and there's downs. And so here at the beginning of this one, I'm going to make it brief, but it is the most tragic thing that has ever happened in our lives. And that was a few years ago, and it involved a car accident with one of our players named Josh Boggs. And you can actually Google Josh Boggs car accident, and you'll read all about it. It made national news actually, because this accident was so bad. And Josh and I, when I was in college, I signed up for a martial arts class, and that's how I met him. We took Taekwondo together. I met his younger brother. They started to play the role playing game back in the second half of the 90s for quite a while. They played two characters named Lance and Hacker, and they've been a big part of the game over the years. And at any rate, when Josh's dad died, he was having karate classes in the basement of the church. So I came out to support him, and I wasn't really going to church at the time. And I met his preacher, who had was a guy named Steve, who used to be in the military, and he was taking the karate classes more kind of for exercise than anything. But Steve and I just really, really hit it off and became really good friends. And I started coming to church out here. I met everybody in this community. They were very welcoming, and I made a mutual friend named Tom, who at one point said, "Hey, I built a new house. Do you want to live in my old house?" So, where I'm living now, it all goes back to Josh, right? So Josh has had a big impact on my life, actually. And at any rate, so we're going to church together. In this one week, it was his daughter's birthday, and she had a sleepover and a party the night before and stuff like that. And the girls all came to church that morning. And after church, sometimes we have a dinner together. And so we did that on that particular Sunday. And then after that, everybody goes their own separate ways. And I was, I went to the lake, and because it was beautiful weather, and my wife and daughter were fishing, and my son and I were doing other stuff to just kind of enjoy springtime. So we were there for hours, and then we went home. And at the time, we were living in town. And so there were messages that we found when we got home that something had happened to Josh. He'd been in this horrible car accident, and it was his brother, who's in the army, stationed in Germany. And he's calling home, and he's like, "Where are you guys at? What's going on?" He's freaking out. And so I go to the hospital, which was right around the corner from where I was living at the time. And they let me in to see Josh, and he's not awake yet. And he just has a hole in his forehead, like the size of a quarter. And like I said, this van was full of kids, right? And at the beginning of the process, I start asking, there's some other people from our church there, and I'm like, is everybody okay? And Tom, who's my landlord now, he just shakes his head no. And he says, not everybody made it. And I was like, oh my God. And like Josh's kids were growing up with my kids. So like my son and his son were best friends. My daughter and Josh's oldest daughter were best friends. And it just it was shocking. And so I'll put it this way. Here at Christmas time, this past Christmas, the only two people from this huge kind of Brady Bunch sized family, the only two people that were still around were Josh and his oldest son. And the oldest son kind of blames Josh for the accident, I think, and they don't even talk anymore. So Josh spent Christmas alone, you know. And so you might be wondering, like, why am I sharing this? Well, so everybody was worried about Josh. Like, funerals happened, multiple funerals, and everybody, yeah, I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but for me, the thing, like when my mom died, for instance, and I was at the funeral home, like all these people come through and they shake my hand and they all kind of say the same thing, which is if there's anything I can do for you, let me know, right? And at any rate, so I had said something similar to Josh, and I don't know if it was at the funeral home or if it was later or when, but I had for sure expressed that to Josh, right? And like I said before, when my mom died, I really started playing the game like hard because I wanted to escape from real life, right? I didn't want to be here where my problems are. I wanted to get away from all of that and escape into the world of kind of make believe. So Josh remembered all that and that's what he had sort of conveyed to me was he wanted to play. And it was actually really amazing. He worked for, I want to say it was MTD in Willard, wherever it was he was working, he had a factory job. And I believe they left him on the payroll and just said, you don't need to come to work until you feel like it, which that's amazing. Not many places would do that. Um, and again, this was like national news. Like everybody everywhere was talking about this. Like around here, I mean. But at any rate, so he started hanging out at my house a lot to play the game. And he had reached out to his uncle Dave, whose name is Dave Derenberger. Nice guy, super nice guy. And Dave was a fan of old school Marvel comics. So Dave was old enough to like be my dad or something like that, right? But back in the day, as unbelievable as this is, he was there for the beginning of Marvel. So like he owned the first appearance of Spider-Man and the first appearance of the X-Men and so on and so forth, right? And he was a huge Marvel fan. And Dave hated Superman, by the way, which is going to come up later. But at any rate, um, so Josh invited Dave to play, and Dave wanted to be supportive of Josh, so he showed up and he played, and he didn't really understand role-playing games, but he wanted to try to, to do it for Josh's sake. And Dave was pleasantly surprised. He was kind of gushing about how awesome he thought role-playing games were once he was doing it. And so he made this character. And like I say, he didn't really understand role-playing games. So I remember telling him, like, you need a superpower. And he wanted to freeze things with his mind, is how he referred to it. And he's like, I want to be called Freezer Burn, and I want to freeze things with my mind. And I said, that sounds awesome. Do you can have cryokinesis, that's fine. Do you also then, I assume, want to have pyrokinesis so that you can burn things with your mind? And he'd be like, why? I'd be like, well, because your name is Freezer Burn. So don't you want to do both? And he's like, am I allowed to do both? And I was like, yeah, sure. And he's like, oh, well, okay, sure, I'll do both then. And it was kind of funny because he would really lean into the freezing part of that, and he would like never burn things, but we gave him both. And in DC Heroes, like they don't have um like cryokinesis, or they don't have pyro. Do they have pyro? No, that's pyrokinetics. Whatever. Pyrotechnics. That's fireworks. At any rate, we had to give him other powers is the point, right? So we gave him I think it was like flame project, and I want to say super breath maybe for the ice. I can't remember which powers we chose now, but you get the gist. So we did that. And then Dave said, I think Josh's character should be a villain, but he doesn't know it. And he would tell me this when it was just me and Dave and Josh wasn't around. But he'd be like, I think you should say that Josh has this like Jekyll and Hyde thing going on rather, where he's actually a villain, but he has no idea that he's the villain. And I said, well, I'm making some big decisions with his character, and I don't know if he would like that. And especially right now, we're trying to go easy on Josh. You know what I mean? Like stuff like I feel like my job as a game master is to challenge my players and throw a wrench in the works and make things hard for them so that they can rise to the challenge and overcome it, right? Because if there's no obstacles, there's no fun. So I'm by no means am I out to get them. I'm not that kind of guy, but I am for sure here to inconvenience them, right? But with everything that had happened to Josh, I wasn't really doing that. I wasn't inconveniencing him. I was like everything was going his way. And so when Dave starts saying like I think Josh should actually be the villain, I was like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. And like another example of Dave not really getting it, as I remember he said he wanted his character's name to be William Dave Spear. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, because it's like William Shakespeare. And I was like, okay, but Dave, like, why is your name involved in this at all? And he's like, because I'm playing him. And I was like, okay, why, what does Shakespeare have to do with fire and ice powers? And Dave would just be like, seemed annoyed, kind of. Like he would kind of laugh, but he would kind of seem annoyed that I was asking him. And I was trying to explain to him, I'm like, I don't feel like you're quite getting it. And I would try to explain it to him. He wasn't really getting it. So we ended up naming his character William Spears. I think it was William David Spears is the name we gave him. And I said, you need to have some sort of an occupation. What do you do for a living? And he said, I'll be a doctor. And he said, because a lot of the Marvel guys were doctors. So Dr. Reed Richards, Dr. Doom, so on and so forth. Dr. Hank Pym, on and on, right? Thor was a doctor. Doctor Strange was a doctor, lots of doctors in Marvel. So he wanted to be a doctor. So he was Dr. William David Spears. And we're like, okay, great. And so, I'd tell him that sort of the way every game would begin, I would ask everybody what they're doing. And that's a chance that I give the players to flesh out their characters. So, for instance, if you're wanting to play, like, let's say, Spider-Man, maybe you're saying something like, Peter and Mary Jane are, whatever. Maybe they have to go to marriage counseling and they're seeing a psychiatrist for their weekly thing or whatever. Or you get the idea, right? It's the subplots, it's the stuff that makes the characters interesting. So I would ask Dave at the beginning of every game, what are you doing? And he would say every time, well, I'm a doctor, so I play golf. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, I'm on the golf course. And I'd be like, okay. And like the next game, that's what he'd be doing. And I'd be like, you don't want to flesh out your character any more than that? You don't want to, like, you have a daughter you haven't talked to for a long time or something like that. And he'd be like, nope, I'm playing golf. And we'd be like, okay. And so we would run a couple of fights, and he was taking damage too easily. That when he had the mind powers and stuff like that, he wasn't like wearing a bulletproof vest, or you know what I mean? And so I started telling him, I was like, I would really like to see your character, since you're the theme of the character now is psychic stuff. I think you should buy off telekinesis. And he was like, why? And I said, well, because then you could have a telekinetic force field, like a skin tight force field. And then that way we could give you, the skin armor power or something like that. And it would represent the idea that there's something going on protecting you from taking damage. And he's like, well, that's cool. And he's like, and then I could start to lift heavy stuff with my telekinesis. And I said, yeah, you could, that'd be pretty neat. And so the powers he has, they're growing. And we're playing a lot because Josh, um, he's wanting to get his mind off of things, right? So we're playing all the time, and I'm giving out points. And so the characters are growing and becoming really, really powerful. And like, for instance, my daughter, she had this character named Bryce who had the theme of that character was water. So he could do water, ice, and steam. So he was kind of like, in a way, he was sort of like a mashup of characters like Iceman and like Aquaman, something like that. But Bryce was very water centric. And so he was also getting more powerful. So Bryce was getting the ability to survive the crushing depths of the ocean floor and stuff like that. I ran this one game that was really cool where I had wanted to do some James Bond stuff. Nobody else was really in the mood for it. So I had made a list of kind of all the James Bond tropes and I started using them. So, for instance, the superhero team gets word about this guy who's like an arms dealer who's up to no good, and his headquarters is on top of this mountain in the Swiss Alps. And so they had to go to like a ski resort that he owned. And then his headquarters is up there on top of the mountain. And um, at one point, the Aquaman knockoff of the group, Bryce, was using his psychic powers to talk to fish in an aquarium. And the fish, uh, the idea was sort of like there's these hotel rooms where one whole wall of the room is an aquarium. And I was just doing it to try to make it seem like a fancy kind of a vacation kind of an idea, right? So my daughter is like, well, if there's fish here, I want to use like my speak with fish to question them and see if they have information for me. And then in a weird way, it was almost like wiretapping a person's room. Is after the bad guys were in there having a meeting, she would go in afterwards and interrogate the fish, right? But the point is, it's a very cool campaign. Everybody is sort of leveling up. And then there would be weeks when Dave couldn't come. He had something else going on in real life. And so what he would say is I'd say to Dave, what do you want your character to be doing? Obviously he's not going on the adventure, but what do you want me to say he's doing? And every time he would say golf. He's at the golf course. If he's not in an adventure, he's at the golf course. I was like, okay. And the other thing that's happening this whole time is Dave keeps saying, well, I really think so and so should actually be the villain. And then we're all going to find out that he was the villain, and it's going to be really shocking. And so he would like say, do that to my daughter's character, something like that. And I'd be like, she loves her character. And she would be so mad at me if I had her secretly be the villain. And he'd be like, well, make it your wife. Have it be her character. And I'd be like, yeah, I don't want to do it to her character either, there, buddy. And he kept arguing. He thought people should be okay with it if I did that. And so the wheels in my mind were turning, right? So I introduce a mysterious villain who we have pictured here, and his name is Darkstar. And he's just an evil Superman. He's just straight up Superman. But he wears an all black suit, and then he's got the goggles are able to withstand his heat vision, stuff like that. The fabric in the mask is not damaged by his own um, super breath, right? And that's a common idea in comics that your costume is immune to your own powers. So, like the Fantastic Four, they have that, right, with unstable molecules and stuff like that, where like the Human Torch doesn't burn his clothes off every time he says flame on. So, yeah, so Dr. Darkstar shows up and is doing bad stuff, and everybody fights him and loses. And then he leaves. And what nobody starts to notice right away is I only run the Darkstar games on the weeks when Dave is not there. And so when Dave comes back and he's like, all right, what did I miss? And I would say, you were at the golf course the whole time. And I would even start to be obvious with things. And I would say, the characters had to go to Switzerland for a week to chase this arms dealer guy. And he'd be like, so what did I do for a week? And I'd be like, you were at the golf course the whole time. And he, not once was he like, really? Like, I played golf for a week straight? Or I wasn't sleeping at night? Like, none of that occurred to him. And so after a while, I start to drop more clues. And so at one point, one of the guys on the team wants to go get a hold of him, and they're trying to call his cell phone, and he won't answer the phone. And so they're like, well, I'm going to go to the golf course and talk to him about how he's missing all these team meetings and so on and so forth. And when they go to the golf course, it's been closed for years. And they're really confused because they're sure this is where he's been telling them he's been going, right? And so it starts to become clear to some of the players that somehow Dr. William David Spears is Darkstar, right? And they even start to realize that Darkstar, well, he has multiple personalities. And so basically, Darkstar is kind of the real guy. And the new personality that has emerged, which is Dr. Spears, is a manifestation of his guilt and his regrets and things like that. But Darkstar knows everything about Spears, but Spears knows nothing about Darkstar, has no idea Darkstar even exists, unless the other team members are telling him something about that. So it turns out when he's saying I'm at the golf course, it's all in his mind. It's like this little pocket of his brain remembers this golf course he used to go to when he was younger. And that is kind of where that personality resides when it's not active. So I'll go back to Josh. So Josh is playing this game, and I don't want to speak for him. So far, I haven't said anything he wouldn't tell you himself. He was very open about the whole accident. He was posting about it on Facebook all the time and had a million followers and stuff like that, you know. So that is all very public stuff, right? He's never told me that he has depression or anything like that, but I just personally like he quit playing. And these days he doesn't really talk to any of his friends anymore. He's kind of like a hermit, you know? So, I mean, I guess draw your own conclusions. Like, I don't know what to say about that. But he quit playing is the point. And so we had been doing a lot of this for his benefit. And so as soon as he quit playing, Dave quit playing because he was really only showing up for Josh. And even though Dave loved it, he just got some other hobbies. He actually started acting. He got involved in the local theater in the town closest to where I live now. Um, he does that's what he spends all of his extra time on. Um, so we weren't quite sure what to do with Darkstar. And as you may or may not know, and by the way, my goal with Darkstar was I was going to try to have the good guy personality become the dominant personality, and I was going to have the villain sort of locked up in this kind of golf course thing in his mind. Does that make sense? Like the golf course would become the villain's prison. And then one of the things I was going to do is I was going to try to craft a story to hopefully get Dave to like Superman. And one of his arguments was Superman, nothing can hurt him, blah, blah, blah. And I was going to, through gameplay, hurt uh, Freezer Burn, and show that no, yeah, you can still be challenged and so on and so forth. And I was just going to try to get him to like Superman. That's all. That was my goal. Um, so none of that was going to happen now, right? Because Dave wasn't going to play. So, whatever plans I come up with on my end, they always have to be ready to change at a moment's notice. So we decided that since Superman's first appearance was 1938, and our Superman in our game world had been exposed to gold kryptonite and couldn't do the job anymore, and we had a character named Superboy, aka Clark Kent III, who was the grandson of the original Superman. We decided it was time for him to step up. And so we said that he was at the Daily Star in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where Superman worked in his first appearance back in Action Comics #1. And then we had Darkstar attack him. And so I used the same stats for both of them. And even though Dave wasn't going to learn anything from this game session, I still moved forward with just the idea that, yes, there are things that can hurt Superman, including an evil Superman. So that's what we did. It was good Superman versus bad Superman. And at the end of the day, they beat Dr. Darkstar. And because, he's not Kryptonian, he was basically like a mutant whose powers just gave him the same powers as a Kryptonian, right? And yeah, he's psychic, but they've done that before in the comics. John Byrne, when he was writing Man of Steel, he also did this Fantastic Four story that I was really ripping off a lot here called Man and Superman. And it's all about Gladiator of the Shi'ar. For those who don't know, Gladiator, by the way, is the name of a book that inspired Siegel and Schuster to create Superman. So by naming the character from the Shi'ar Gladiator, that was very intentional on the part of the creators of back at Marvel back in the day. So he is absolutely supposed to be a Superman, but he's psychic. All the stuff he does is psychic in nature. So the way he can fly through space is he's using telekinesis on himself. So all those ideas I had used for Darkstar. So that's what I mean when I say he's another Superman, even though he's a psychic. He's just arriving at all the same, he does all the same stuff just for different reasons, right? But my long-winded point there is they were able to use one of those collars like the X-Men have, the Genoshan inhibitor collars, and just shut him down. And so they took him to a facility in the Cleveland area for him to speak with a psychologist and hopefully get a handle on his multiple personality syndrome. And then that's the last time we ever saw Darkstar. Dave is a nice guy, by the way. I would love it if Dave wanted to play again. And then we could revisit the character and, see where we wanted to go from here. But if Dave's not around to play him, I'm probably not going to use him anymore. Uh, but yeah, that is kind of the Darkstar Saga in our game, and that went over really well in our game actually. The players really liked how that all, worked out. And ironically, they liked Dave's suggestion that one of the heroes should be the villain. We did Dave's thing, it's just we did it to his character. And since he had said he thought that people should be okay with it if the GM did that, I took that as the green light to do it to him. But yeah, that was that. Hopefully you enjoyed um hearing about Darkstar. I thought the story was interesting. If you did too, we would love it if you chose to support the channel by hitting the like button, making sure you're still subscribed, and leaving us a comment. And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.